Hey everyone, I'm Alex, welcome to Trash Film Addict, and today I'm talking about the Blu-ray of Lucio Fulci's Perversion Story, which is a 1969 thriller, and this Blu-ray is from the French boutique label Le Chat qui Fume. Now I got this release nearly a year ago, I guess that was during the first lockdown, and the package took a while to get to me because the post at the time, it was really just a mess. Nothing was arriving. So at the time, I was really happy when this package came through. But then, quite frankly, I opened it, I looked at the cover, I was like, okay, nice. I just put it on my shelf, I never watched it. And finally, I got around to watching it today. Look at it, look at the packaging. It's, as usual with this label, really, really nice artwork. Props to them for using the original poster image for this. And it does misrepresent the film. I'm sure it sold lots more copies because you have this picture basically appealing to the male gaze, saying, okay, look, this is going to be a guy with a gun dominating blondes, so that's not really the story that the film tells, because there is a male protagonist, but he's actually a bit of a victim of the circumstances, and he's never at any point throughout the film in control of what's happening. So this is the first little cheat here. Also the title, Perversion Story. Now that's let's say that's a bit exaggerated. There is nothing perverse in this film whatsoever. If you had to put this title on a Fulci film, I would probably use it for his later film, The Devil's Honey, which, you could say, okay, there was a little bit of kink there, something. But here in Perversion Story, there is no perversion whatsoever. It's a straight up detective mystery. There is a bit of investigation, there is a murder mystery, and we are basically kept in suspense. So it's taking the tropes from like Golden Age mystery novels, and then by way of Hitchcock. Obviously it's from the late 60s, so there is a bit of nudity thrown in to guarantee the sales. So there are quite a few naked female breasts in this film, so they could have titled it the breast story, and that would have been probably more fair. But that's the title. The original Italian title is Una sull'altra, which means one on top of the other, which means nothing really. Again, it's not what happens in the film, and it doesn't mean anything in itself. Perversion Story, okay, that's commercial, but that's hardly representative. Anyway, great cover. On to the film, the image quality. This was the first time I saw this film on Blu-ray. Originally I saw it on DVD, and there is a lip-in quality, but this is a film from the 60s, so they had to use like a composite of several sources to make the most complete version available. So there are jumps in quality. If you're anal about that sort of thing, you might have a problem here, because there is very pronounced grain, there are some really wild contrasts. But personally, I love films shot on film, 35mm, that's my dream. It didn't have that waxy problem where they used the filter. It was really nice and clean, and you could really feel like, okay, this is slightly degraded, but this is original film material being used here, and I loved it. So it's like watching a proper vintage film. The sound, we have 3 audio tracks. We have the Italian track, the French track, and the English track. And they're, again, it's variable because, owing to the vintage of the film, you can hear some distortion, again, how it was mixed, how it was recorded in those days. Obviously, for today's audiophile standards, sure, that is a modest presentation, but fully adequate considering what we're working from, so no complaints there whatsoever. Again, there are some extras. There is like even a soundtrack CD. If you like jazz, that's a great CD. It's a straight up jazz big band score. It's from Rizzo Ortolani. Fulci apparently was a jazz fan, so he also put a bit of jazz in his final film, Door to Silence, which again shares with Perversion Story this opening credits, with this kind of helicopter shots flying over a bridge across the water. So there it was like Louisiana, and here we are in San Francisco. So there is that big band jazz, and you see you follow this protagonist driving across a long bridge. So there is that similarity there. So we have the soundtrack CD as an extra, and then there are a couple of interviews. There is Elsa Martinelli, probably the most upmarket actor in this film. She was like in quite a few high-profile author films in the 60s. she hasn't really got much to say about this film. It was obviously not her genre. She wasn't like a very prominent participant in the giallo scene or in the Italian genre cinema at all. And so yeah, her recollections are limited, but it's nice to see her because yeah, if you're a fan of Italian cinema, Elsa Martinelli, yeah, she's been in a few decent films. And then there is an interview with Jean Sorel, speaking French. So yeah, it's a really nice presentation, looks quality, looks really good, on your shelf. Yeah, Perversion Story. I guess that film doesn't get as much love as some of Fulci's later films because it's not extreme enough. Maybe some people reckon it's a bit dated. Among his thrillers, it's probably the tamest one. There is literally virtually no body count, and you know, it comes right at the very beginning of his interesting part of his career. Yeah, because nobody cares about Fulci's comedies in the English-speaking territories because, you know, they're not available and people just don't really appreciate that sort of humor usually. So Perversion Story seems to be like the first Fulci on the way to becoming the Fulci we love, which is the Fulci of no plot, fog machines, zombies, gore. But yeah, Fulci's golden period, if you think about it, was only like 2.5 years in the early 80s. So if you just limit your interest to that, that's very, very narrow. So the thrillers really, really deserve your re-evaluation as well, and Perversion Story in particular. It's very tightly constructed, wonderful re-elaboration of the typical Agatha Christie Golden Age detective story mechanics. You have basically like inheritance as a motive for the culprit. You have this kind of, you know, it's like going back to Mysterious Affair at Styles. It's like some kind of maybe a slipping pills or something, which if you OD on them, this could mean like death, and they wouldn't be easy to trace at the autopsy. Also, Perversion Story is the first Fulci film, I think, where you see like a decomposing body, and there is like a nice zoom in on that, so you see like this rotten corpse, which is like a little indication which way the things were developing. And I find that great. The size of the production, this is again one of Fulci's more epic films with, you know, filming in France and Spain, some location shooting in, obviously in San Francisco in the US. Then they even dashed to New York for a little pickup shoots around the airport there. And the interiors were obviously done in Rome, and the visuals, oh my god, this film has this was made in winter, so the exterior shots, they benefit from that low light. It's like almost always magic hours. So Alejandro Ulloa, who is the DOP who shot Jess Franco's best looking film, which is to me best looking film, which is Miss Muerte, the diabolical Dr. Z. So he's the DOP here. In the interiors there is this very interesting chiaroscuro lighting a lot of the time, where you don't have the whole room lit from all sides, but actually you just have this source of light lighting one person, for example, and then the other person, the other figure remains in the shadow. So there is that interesting, immediately, yeah, it underlines the plot dynamics where you don't know who's manipulating whom, this whole, you know, scheming in the background. So that's very, very nicely underscored through the visuals. And because it's shot on film, it just has that nice texture, which, I mean, personally, I love it. Some people might say, oh, there is too much contrast, too much grain, but I really rejoiced in just the visual splendor. Again, the use of split screen, that's something very surprising. I think Fulci used it maybe a couple of times in his filmography, and here it's purely like decorative. There is just, you know, it's just a part of the, it doesn't really bring the plot forward, but it gives the film its nice identity. The interiors, it's very, very interesting, because I think this interior shots where the main character lives, the doctor and his wife, I'm pretty sure a couple of years later Argento reused that house as the Terzi residence for Cat O' Nine Tails. If you look at that staircase, and then there is that big round mosaic on the floor, on the ground floor, I think it's the same location. It's just, these are the things you spot when you rewatch the film. You notice, you know, some bit part actors in the background, like, for example, in Perversion Story this time around, I noticed like Bobby Rhodes has a little walk-on part as like prison warden in the end in San Quentin. I think they actually went to San Quentin and shot a little bit there in the gas chamber, because you see some of the wardens really look like proper American wardens, and it looks like a very authentic room. So it must have been location shooting, which shows you just how much of a budget they had, because the film was an Edmondo Amati production, who financed films like Cannibal Apocalypse or Let Sleeping Corpses Lie or Fulci's Lizard in a Woman's Skin, or even Alberto De Martino's Antichrist, which is an Exorcist ripoff twice as big as the original The Exorcist. There is these epic scenes with lots of actors and extras, so it's like this huge production which is basically a clumsy Exorcist ripoff. So that's Edmondo Amati for you. He would really put up the funds to make the films look quite big, even though he was basically a commercial producer. So yeah, with this film here, with Perversion Story, it's pretty epic in scope, and the editing, again, it's a lot more articulate compared to Fulci's later films. There is a lot more finer editing going on. If you notice that sort of thing, you can really appreciate it. The filmmaker's inside. There is a rhythm and the syntax to this film, which is really quite superior to his later films, even though the later films, obviously, later Fulci developed his visionary ability to the point where he could just carry the film, where there would be a very rudimentary plot. He could just carry the film with his film prowess along, with just the camera telling the story, with the music. The atmosphere would be generated purely from his, the way he moved the camera about and, blocked the scene. Whereas at this point, where still kind of more dialogue based, so this is a very rational plot, and so owing to the genre, we always have long scenes of characters basically relating lots of plot information to each other just verbally, and yeah, it can be sometimes difficult to keep up, and this is what they expect from you, that you give up on putting those bits together, and this is how they can smuggle in the surprise twist on you, which is directly coming from the Agatha Christie genre of surprise storytelling. And it works really well here. Like I said, I think in terms of the ending and the payoff, this is one of the most satisfying films Fulci has ever directed. And obviously there is this whole final big explanation, who did what and why, so that involves the character sort of retracing the steps and, for the viewer's benefit, retelling everything they've done. But that doesn't happen at the very end, so the culprit is revealed, but the film goes on for nearly 20 minutes after that, and there is still suspense, which I think is a really quite an impressive achievement, because there is still suspense. We're wondering what's going to happen. Is an innocent person going to die or not? I'm not going to reveal anymore, but for me, the film really worked all the way through to the end, because knowing Fulci, he's not like a king of happy ends. So you think, is he just going to kill everybody off like he's done so many times before? Is this going to be like a grim ending? You just don't know with Fulci, which is why this film kept me in suspense. Yeah, the second time around, yes, you know who the culprit is, but still, you can watch it for the style, and you can appreciate better how they are hiding the culprit and the plot mechanics. Now, I discovered one on top of the other, Perversion Story, quite late in my life. By then I was already a hardcore Fulci fan. I knew his gore films by heart. So it was a nice surprise discovering a film which was articulate, well constructed, and absolutely not dependent on violence or any kind of, let's say, poetic absurdity or anything irrational. So this was like a totally different facet to Fulci, and it increased again my love and appreciation for that great filmmaker, one of my favorite filmmakers. It's not a film I watch all that often, but then again, I've only discovered it not that long ago, and every time I watch it, I find something to appreciate there. As a time capsule, I think it has plenty of value. For Fulci fans, it's maybe not the key title because it's not extreme enough, but again, there are some indications of which way his career would progress already here. It's a very rational film and well plotted, and the cast is decent. Jean Sorel is as inexpressive as ever, but photogenic, nice blue eyes. He's just, in all his close-ups, the same facial expression. But he's a really nice man. In the extras, when you watch the interview, he's a super nice gentleman, so really obviously very nice person. The music is jazz, the music is again very period. I love jazz, so I had no problem, so I'm really happy to have the CD in this release. One more little thing I found curious is that thinking that in 1969 Fulci was already a filmmaker with like 10 years experience, whereas George Romero has just made Night of the Living Dead and was making his follow-up films. Ironically, the way things would work out, in 10 years time Fulci was struggling to get hired to get a project off the ground. We're talking late 70s, and Romero is riding the success of Dawn of the Dead, and what happens? Fulci gets offered to helm a Dawn of the Dead ripoff, which is zombie, and it ends up reinvigorating Fulci's career one last time. So it's ironic how the George Romero thing, how owing to the crisis of the Italian film industry, Fulci was imitating authors who were much younger than himself and who came on stage much later than himself. So that's I think that's always just shows you what filmmaking is. It's basically a market, and you know, if things sell, that's great. If they don't sell, you know, you are very quickly just shoved off the stage, and it's up to us viewers to celebrate films, because you know, the producers, the filmmakers, everyone's out to make some cash, and it's only the film maybe let's say film enthusiasts who pick those films up and celebrate them and give them maybe a new lease of life, which even can prompt like a rediscovery of certain films. Yeah, and I think this is what's happening with some of the Fulci films now that he's become such an established name in the international circles, sadly after his passing. Now we're digging up those lost gems, which I'm sure he would have been really pleased about people celebrating films like Perversion Story or his early thrillers more than films like Cat in the Brain, for example. You know, just because he knew that his craftsmanship was at its peak and his budgets and care put into the screenwriting were at their peak in the late 60s, early 1970s, when the Italian film industry was still going strong and could sustain the budgets needed for those kind of more elaborate projects. So yeah, that was my talk on Lucio Fulci's Perversion Story. I'm definitely going to talk more Lucio Fulci in the coming videos. Thanks a lot for watching. So do you have a favorite Lucio Fulci thriller? What do you even think of his thrillers? Have you seen this particular one, Perversion Story? What do you think about French Blu-rays? They don't get much talked about in the English language circles because obviously, yeah, not all of them are English friendly. This one here has the English track, so it makes it perfectly okay to own if you don't speak Italiano or French. So thanks again for watching. That was me, Alex, with Trash Film Addict, and see you next time. Bye bye.